Yes. Shalom, Chaverim. Shalom. This is Yadin. This is Yadin here. LOJ Society, the Line of Judah Society, LOJS.org. So here on the Rastafari Yehudim, Rastafari Jews, right here. Let's touch on Africa. Now, we're going to state this statement right here. Africa is not Africa. What we have come to, we're speaking about the continent, right? The continent that's called today Africa. I don't know how many times that we've touched on this and gone into different details from different perspectives, brought forward exhibits, brought forward facts and evidence, and still in the so-called the pseudo-black conscious community of today, the modern, let's call it the modern kind of HOK, especially on social media, the modern black conscious community, this truth seems to fall on deaf ears because a lot of the pseudo-scholars out there are actually apologists, right? They're in defense of, right? They're in defense of the Western Gentile, this latter-day Western Gentile, white supremacist, pseudo-scholarship and academia, right? You know, they both going to these pseudo-universities, and nothing wrong with the universities per se, but it's like, you know, you could take the horse to the water, but you can't make the horse drink, right? So you could give some of these N-words like books and in universities and in scholastic institutions, but you can't really make them think. And especially not think really for themselves, because really they don't really know themselves, but they say they are Africans and they're defending Africa. I was checking out part of I think House of Consciousness, HOK, Sarnetta studio. He had a couple of ones-on-ones on there, like, you know, one that they called Dr. Reggie, and I think one named Morpheus, a couple callers. They was discussing Islam. I think Tazariak of the ISUPK, Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, he got into a debate with, I think, a Mohammedan or so-called Muslim scholar, so forth and so on. I didn't get to check out the fullness of that, but ones gave their perspectives on how that turned out. And I think it was very interesting, but even with one of our brethren had a podcast. What was it called? What You Know About God and His Chosen People. What You Know About God and His Chosen People. Lawrence Davis. It's up on the Anchor FM. I did say before I was going to put it in the links, the Anchor FM, so ones can check out some of the podcasts that I was on with Captain Azania of the ISUPK, bringing forth that particular Hebrew Israelite perspective. Also, the African Israelites of Jerusalem, Brother Yaniv, got to heal up Brother Yaniv as well. And I, Rasiadonis, representing the Royal Order of the Ethiopian Hebrews, right? The Royal Order of the Ethiopian Hebrews, Rastafari Yehudim, the LOJ Society, the Lion of the Tribe of Judah Society, and the mission here in the Americas and the Caribbean. And it's very interesting because we touched on this before. I think one time he brought on a Mohammedan. We refer to them as Mohammedan. They call themselves Muslim and say Islam, but they're really Mohammedan, right? He brought on a Mohammedan that wanted to talk some stuff about, how that is what's for black people, so forth and so on. And he was just shut down. And even though the ISUPK, Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, Captain Azania, there's disagreements that we have on certain particular points, but certain things we agree on as far as who we once lost, now found black and brown peoples here in this Americas and the Caribbean are, speaking of being Israelites and being, at least known to the foreigners, the foreigners, the foreigners known and the Gentiles as Hebrews, some refer to us as black Hebrews, so forth and so on. We all shut him down, on his version, right? Because he comes from a version of Islam that thinks that the people in the so-called Middle East today, are Arabs true. The original so-called Arab people are black peoples, even related to many ancient Ethiopian peoples. But here's what's particularly interesting. One brother, he brought out a point, because I think it was Dr. Reggie's perspective, that that even though if a few Arabs might be black, that it's not a black thing. It's not a black thing and has something to do with Africa. So he's trying to defend so-called the continent of Africa, Africa. And you hear a lot of this about Africa, right? And what many of these pseudo scholars fail to do is really to identify what the true roots of the terminology that we utilize. What's the real etymology of Africa, right? Because you hear a lot of folks talk about Africa, and then they'll talk about things that occurred, say, 1,000 years ago, right? Or 2,000 years ago, or 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, going back to ancient Mizraim, right? From a Hebrew perspective, Mitzrayim or Mizraim, ancient Egypt, aka Kemet, as ones will say. And they will associate this with so-called Africa, but never really enlightening their audiences, right, to really what is Africa, right? The terminology that we refer to as Africa. And so in this particular vlog, this video right here, I try to give a little bit of that kind of intro, like how do we get to this point right now, to bring forward this point right now. So we could give some receipts, but receipts show what you paid for. All right, we're going to give some invoices, all right? Some invoices. Invoices is a request for payment, right? Payment, right? Because only on our platforms, well, not only, but mainly on our platforms, and those who have, tuned into the Rastafari Sabbatical and also the Ethiopian World platform that we had previously, and even we have some things up there, I think, on Ethiopian World Net and elsewhere, as well, know this to be true, right? That we give invoices, right? We give the exhibits, the facts, the evidence, but also now we're going to issue invoices. You hear a lot of folks talking about receipts. I got the receipts. Show me the receipts. No, we're going to show you invoices, because a receipt basically is what you paid for. Well, an invoice, when you get an invoice, this means what you owe, right? It's a request for payment. So this terminology, Africa, whether you want to spell it with a C or you want to spell it with a K, right? And this is what separates this latter day black so-called consciousness community, so to speak, especially on social media, the social media community, the latter day, black conscious community. We'll say post 90s, after the 90s, like coming into this new millennia of the 2000, over the past like 20 or so years, from the real, let's just call it the real black consciousness community. There's a big difference, right? Even though we have ones like, say, Sonetta, who's been like sort of a videographer, a witness, especially through his, videotaping and having certain lectures and having certain debates, so forth and so on. And he is privy to he came in on like what we recall, at least when his name first came up, we knew about him from like, say, the 90s or so, right? From the 90s, Sonetta, he was one who was selling certain ones-on-ones videos, bootlegs as they were, some original things, but a lot of bootlegs on 125, 125th Street. This is all prior to the Rudy Giuliani. I want to point out Rudy Giuliani, because people know the history up there, Harlem, across from the Adam Clayton Powell Jr. office building in that particular area up there, and also where the Apollo is, from over 20 years ago. So a lot of the youngins who were born anytime around 2000, maybe a little before, but mainly after 2000, might not know this, but it's important for the youngins who are seeking and researching and studying to kind of get the context, a context of the so-called information and a lot of the disinformation and the misinformation that they have received and been deceived by. First things first is, what and where is Africa? And what and where does this terminology that we call Africa really and truly come from? Now, the original name of the continent, let's back it up right here and touch on some invoices, right? Invoices. Let the others talk about receipts. right? And as ones and ones get this for themselves, you're going to hear more and more ones talk about invoices, right? Invoices. But, you know, we have to, we have to be leaders, right? To go ahead. Ones and ones are not up on this, the invoice, right? They're talking about receipts. Remember, receipt, when you have a receipt shows what you paid for. An invoice shows what you owe, right? So we are issuing invoices now, right? Invoices, right, says what these are ones and ones owe, right? The receipts that ones want to talk about is maybe what they paid for. But like if you go and you buy something, you might buy something and it's really no good for you, or you find out it's not what you thought you bought, and then you go back to the store or wherever you got it from and you show, your receipt, and you show the product and you try to get a refund, right? This is not about refunds, right? This is about payment, right? So let's pay up the true knowledge to the people who really seek to know the truth. Now here you see this map right here, right? And this particular map is it's an older map, right? Now some of these maps go back to like the 1700s. Like a lot of the older maps, 1700s and the 1800s. Around the 1800s time, things start to change up. But the continent, in the oldest maps that we can find of the continent that is called today of Africa as Africa, in the oldest maps, the continent was referred to as Ethiopia. The continent is referred to as Ethiopia. Now, this is an interesting map right here because you'll notice with the arrows and the quote, end quote, right? You see where they have Abyssinia, or some from Arabia Fusa, right? This term Abyssinia has a few possible etymologies. The common etymology comes from the Arabia Fusa, or the Arabic, where you hear like Al-Habasha, Habasha, right? That comes out of like Arabic, but then we can also trace an indigenous etymology of the Kabasha, right? Connected with the Nile Valley civilization. And at the headwaters of the Nile Valley civilization is what we call today, right, Ethiopia. Even today, there's a whole war kind of brewing over the GERD, what's called the GERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. And actually the plans for the GERD, Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, go back to the time, in his days and his times, Kadamawi Haile Selassie, the conquering line of the tribe of Judah, root of David, right, has prevailed, right? So we'll open some seals right here, right? But here you see the pointing to Abyssinia. See where Abyssinia is on this particular map? Then you notice where Ethiopia is on this particular map. Now, if you know how the modern map looks today, right? Now, these maps represent the times of the Gentiles. Let's just put that on the beamer right here. The times of the Gentiles. Have you heard of the terminology? The times of the Gentiles. The times of the Gentiles. Who are the Gentiles? The Goyim. When we say the Goyim from the Hebrew, the Goyim. And we're speaking of the other nations. The other nations other than called Yisrael. Other than Israel Hulu. Other than all of Israel. Right? Israel is the particular people, right, of Hashem, and then, because all this is referring to a Hebrew, we can say Israelite, a biblical perspective. So we're coming from a biblical perspective, even according to the teaching of His Majesty, Kadamawi Haile Selassie, right? For my part, I glory in the Bible, right? So we're coming from this particular perspective, but we are showing and proving based on other evidences that can be found outside of the Bible, the truth, the veritas or the verity of the scripture, right? Even going through certain scholarship of the present time, but also linking back with former times. Now, note where Ethiopia is on the present map, right? This is like Central Africa. You notice that right there? Notice where Sudan is on this particular map, right? Notice where Sudan is on this particular map. Now, we have other maps, right, that we can go through and show you where the same area that is pointed to Sudan is actually pointed to as Negro land. Some of y'all probably have seen those particular memes out there. Negro land, Negro land. Where is Negro land? Where is Negro land? I'm repeating certain questions or certain words because these are words for the Chabarim, for the Talmudim, for the disciples to take note of, right? Where is Negro land? So we can follow up on that, right? But in this particular map, we're showing you that Sudan is not where you have Sudan today, right? Where Sudan is today. Sudan here on this particular map, right? Or Saudan, because Saud comes from an Arabic word that means black, like Aswad. We have Aswad, Saud, right? Sudan, Aswad, the land of the blacks, right? So a lot of the Western Gentile or European scholarship, especially going back a couple of hundred years, linked with some of the great so-called Arabic, right, or Arabic language scholarship. Some would even link the Moors, the Moors from the earlier days. Not these latter-day Noble Drew Ali Moors, but the Moors from earlier times, right? Those who are more linked with this particular tradition, right, that had Arabic, right, as its main linguistic, intellectual language. So the Europeans, another point about the Europeans too, you'll find that many of them who were involved in certain Mason or Mason societies, Masonic societies, wore the fez. We even saw a J. Edgar Hoover, picture where he's wearing a fez. I think also one of, who was that president? What was his name? Truman. Truman also, the Truman Show. Truman also wearing a fez as well. What does that tell you? That tells you that they were initiated and they received certain learning and intellectualization or education and scholarship from the Arab world, right? From the Arab world. And when I say the Arab world, I'm not talking about the Arab world of today, right? We're going back in time, right? So we can trace, well, how do we get here? Like what's going on nowadays? So much confusion because most of them can't get past the 400-year barrier. There's a 400-year barrier on these slow Negroes, on these hating on our Israelite heritage and who we really are, Negro. There's like a mental barrier, a block. And I've been noticing this over and over when I hear certain questions go back and forth. I recognize that they just spin around in a 400-year cycle and only the latter part of the 400-year cycle, and they become apologists for this latter-day Gentile whitewash, right, COINTELPRO disinformation. Right, listening to Reggie, it really came out with Reggie talking about Africa this, Africa that. This is what partially prompted us to go into another video, right, another vlog on, well, what and where is Africa, right? Now, on this particular map, if you notice something, it's pointing out different areas. You see where Abyssinia is, roughly where we have modern Ethiopia, at least the northern part, or the part that might be called more of the Shemitic, the Afro-Shemitic part of Ethiopia, right? Then you can see where that is called Abyssinia. Then we have Ethiopia in the central portion of it, right? The central portion, like where Congo and them regions are, also the Congo and the latter-day Moors, right, with Leopold, and the Moorish connection with the extermination of black peoples by many of these same fez wearers. So note how the Europeans, right, Edgar Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, Gay Edgar Hoover, also ones like, the Truman, and others were involved in Masonic, Freemasonic lodges and other sort of Masonic society, Freemasonic societies, and they wore fezzes, right? This is the reason why they refer to Ethiopia here as Abyssinia, because we know that the people themselves did not call themselves that. And we can go back a couple of hundred years, I mean several hundred years, and we don't have the indigenous Ethiopian, what we call today the indigenous Ethiopian people of several hundred years ago referring to themselves as Abyssinians. It's the Europeans and European scholarship that has been initiated by the previous Arabo-Islamicist scholarship. You know, we go back to El Cid in Spain and Alhambra, you know, like the different intellectual institutions of the previous time. Now, I know we're touching on various things right here. We're going to get to the main part of our exhibit. Just wanted to show this right here. Let's pull out of this. Let's see what maps that we have right here. Let's go through some of the maps right here. There's also another old map that we'll like to show something on this right here, because some of this is actually connected with another particular lecture that we had as well. Let's pull this down right here. You know, and studying the maps is one of the most interesting things. Studying some of the ancient, you know, the ancient maps right here. Right? This is like one map right here breaking down certain Israelite or Jewish and Israelite communities. Right? You know, we have the Sephardi community, the Mediterranean, the Mizrahi community. You see how large the Mizrahi community right there, and then its connection with the Ethiopian, right? The Ethiopian, the Israelites of Ethiopia, and the Ethiopian, the black Jews of Ethiopia community. And then way up in the north, you can see the Ashkenaz, right, community, how that cuts across even the Ottoman Turkish region known as Turkey, right? Let's go through this right here. Okay, now, here's what's interesting. You see where we have Libya? You see where Libya is on this particular map? That is what Africa was in the time of the Romans. That's where Africa comes from. This terminology, Africa. Let's segue right here and show this right here to y'all right here. Here we are at Etim Online. Etim Online. Because there was a question that came up on this whole Islamic debate on Sarnetta House of Consciousness, you know, where Dr. Reggie, he talked about this one is apologist, that one is apologist. Then one of the callers asked him, well, what is an apologist? What is apologist? He wanted to know the definition of apologist. And instead of giving a definition, the real definition, he kind of hopped, skipped, and jumped around, you know, what it means. You know, he said, well, an apologist, I paraphrase this, is apologist, someone who when Africa is being like raped or invaded by the Arabs, you know, like is trying to justify that, you know, so forth and so on. That's not really what the apologist means. Apologist is not like we say today, somebody say sorry and they say I apologize. Apologist really means in defense of. If you go back to the Greek roots, these words we use in English today have Greco-Roman roots, either in Greek or in Latin. And real scholars get to the roots of words, right? Get to the etymological roots of words so they can better understand and utilize the connotation. The connotation is how words are used today. So in the root meaning of Africa, Africa was Libya. What we have on the map today, roughly as the area known as Libya and Tunisia, that was Africa on the ancient maps during the times of the Romans. The times of the Romans. So I mentioned the Romans. People say, why are you talking about the Romans? Because we're living in a Greco-Roman society today. Rome is the ones who had a republic. They didn't like monarchy. They didn't like kings. Right? This is why Julius Caesar, you know, Julius Caesar, you know, got stabbed up, you know, by the Dagger Squad. You know, this is why what happened to him, because the white Romans, who upset a previous indigenous black community, right, in the Mediterranean, known as the Etruscans, when they took over that particular region, they didn't want no kings. Right? They didn't want no kings. They were not into monarchy and kings. So they were into a republic. right? Before them was the Greeks, right? The Graccoi. And the Graccoi did the same thing previous. This is where the Romans got it from, of the Latines, the Latin. This is why we have Latin, because they were the Latines, right? The Latin, Indo-European, right, or white peoples, recessive gene, genetically speaking, recessive gene, albino recessive gene people that had invaded and took over a place across from Africa, what we call Africa today, Southern Europe, and he took over, what we know as Rome, right? Before them was the Greeks. The Greeks did the same thing, the Graccoi. They were known the Graccoi, or the Hellenists, the people of Hellas, the people of hell, of Hellas, right? That was the white people. They took over where black people were previously, and the previous people are known as the Ionian. Look up the Ionian. In some of the scholarship out there, they have them listed under the Minoans, the Minoan people, right? A melanated people who are found even on the wall paintings of Kemet or Mitzrayim of Egypt as the Keftiu. And in the Bible, they're referred to in Amos 9 and 7 as the Kaftor, the Kaftorim. So the Keftiu on the wall paintings in Egypt, it even shows how they looked. And we look at the look of them there, and we compare that with the Minoan, what's called the Minoan paintings and the Minoan archaeology, and you can see it's the same sort of people. So these were black peoples who were on the continent that's called Africa today, as well as across the Middle Earth Sea, known as the Mediterranean. But here, if you've been looking at the screen while I've been speaking, you'll see where we have Afrique, African. You see what it says African? African 1580s. You see what it says African 1580s. So according to etymology, and that means going back into written documentation where things was written, going back into written documentation, the earliest time that we find the term Africa referring to the continent known today as Africa was circa 1580s. See, the Europeans, so-called Europeans, the Gentiles, they play this, the Goyim, the Gentiles, because that's considering all the ones of the Berlin Conference are Gentiles. So when we talk about the Gentiles, we're talking about those of the Berlin Conference, right? And the latter-day ruling Gentiles, mother and daughter. We're speaking about Britain and America, right? The Anglo-American Empire, the Anglo-American world order, the head of this Gentile world system, right? The system of the nation states, That's why when we start to look at maps, we see that in some of the earlier maps concerning the continent known as Africa, we find that there's not these artificial borders. But then we get to see later on, after the Berlin Conference, where they divided up Africa amongst the Gentiles, or these European nations. When we say nations refer to the Goyim. And these particular nations that the Bible calls in the Hebrew Goyim are these European nations. And that also proves that the prophecy within the Hebrew scriptures, the Yehudit scriptures, is right and accurate. So you can see that African 1580s. So 1580s, that is roughly a little less than 500, right? 500 years ago. That's less than 500 years ago, right? That's roughly less than 500 years ago, the 1580s. This is when the term first came about. That means that when you hear these pseudo-scholars talk about, ancient Egypt and Africa, they should at least inform their students and their audience what we call Africa today. Because when they don't do that, this is where their science, historical science, scholarship is pseudo, is false. We can't talk about ancient Egypt on the continent of Africa because in the time there was no naming of it as Africa. If we want to be a little more accurate, we could say the continent that we find in the earliest references when we talk about a continent being referred to as Ethiopia. So before the continent was called Africa, it was referred to as Ethiopia. Right? But here, let's just show you this right here. Sometimes used as a noun. Let's look up this right here. Let's bring this up. Let's look up Africa, right? So let's read this right here. Africa. Let's go right here. Let's see if we can do this right here. Okay. We're going to have to open it like this right here. Excuse me for that, where it says open an app. We don't have the app. I guess in the future we'll download the app to have the app there. But let's read this right here. You can still see this right here, right? Africa, now, Latin. So the terminology is Latin. They're investing a whole lot in this Latin terminology, talking about they are scholars of the ancient culture, and we want to get back to the times of black men when we were rulers and this and that, but you're not even addressing, right, the pseudo-scholarship. So Latin, Africa, terra, right? African land. What does it say right there? African land was what? African land was Libya. Was the African continent ever called Libya? But Libya was Africa. This brings a whole new perspective to ancient Egypt was not in Africa. You know what I'm saying? Was not in Africa. Of course, today we see maps because we are under that spell, the spell of the Gentiles, the spell of Leviathan. We're under that spell today. Well, when I say we, just generally speaking, when we say Africa, today is called Africa. But until we break that spell that it was not known as Africa back then, right? Some will talk about the Al-Kibu land. I know some say Al-Kibu land, but they haven't really brought forward the evidence. Yes, many scholars, black scholars, have written about Al-Kibu land, Dr. Ben and others, so forth and so on, but they did not really prove this in any monuments, any wall paintings, any ancient artifacts, or any latter-day artifacts even. This is just a speculation that it was called Al-Kibu land. So it was called Al-Kibu land? You mean back then they used the word land? I mean land, like we say land today? That just shows you the pseudo-scholarship. Right here, this is real scholarship right here, because this is fact. This is how we get to what we get to today, right? African land was Libya. It was the Carthaginian territory, the province of Africa. So Africa was not a continent in the times of the Romans. Africa was a province. So this is how the white supremacy has gotten to rule pseudo-scholars and black people's hearts and minds. Because first they had taken over a province, a particular region of territory, the capstone of the continent known as Libya and Tunisia. They took that over. It was a Roman province, and that province was called Africa, right? And then they were able to superimpose that once they got that foothold, and then make all y'all believe that the whole continent now should be called Africa, and thus they rule Africa. And they divided and conquered Africa in the times of the nation states, the times of the Gentiles, by making up all these artificial borders. And then they have us and have you all and have everybody arguing, pro-black people arguing over nonsense when we're not even looking at how the COINTELPRO started. The COINTELPRO mean counterintelligence program. So many of your so-called pseudo-scholars, your black conscious scholars who like to opine like the Dr. Reggies are pseudo-scholars for that very reason. Even though there are some things that they do put forward that we recognize as right and accurate. This is not one of them. So here, Africa was a Roman province. And then Africa becomes the whole continent. Now tell me if this is not conquering. This is you talk about divide and conquer. And how did they conquer it? They conquered by way of the word. Just like the Bible says, in the beginning was the word. They made you believe and they make you believe the whole continent is Africa. And when other scholars come forward and bring the facts and evidence like ourselves, people say, oh, yeah, but anyway, today is Africa, and what we're going to do about Africa? The thing we need to do about Africa is to give it its proper name, the continent its proper name, and to recognize how we got into the pseudonym, the pseudonym. Here it says the feminine of adjective Africus. So what it's saying here is that Africa, referring to the terra, the land, is the feminine, right, form of from the Latin, the feminine of the adjective Africus, right? From, look what it says, I fear. Look what it says, I fear, and African. I fear. Now, I fear is a very important terminology right there. Now, we can get into the I fear. The I fear, also in the Hebrew, we have the afar. Afar is the dust, right? The dust, right? Not talking about these dusty niggas, but we're talking about the dust. Well, we're talking about them too, but the dust, right? The dust, daughters of the dust, right? My people, the Geechee Gullah, right? The Geechee Gullah nation, right? I fear. So I fear, they say, quote, an African. Notice they say the word of uncertain origin. We know the origin. The origin is known, but for them to put the origin there will show that the roots once again are Ethiopian or Afro-Semitic, linguistically speaking, right? Or Ethiopian, Afro-Semitic. In other words, we can go into the Afro-Semitic language that's called Hebrew or Yehudit. We can go into the Afro-Semitic language that's called Amharic and come to the roots that they say right here. You see what it says right here? They say a word of uncertain. We just want to highlight that for ones that don't see. A word of uncertain origin. What word is of uncertain origin? They say afir. To who? They know what the origin is, but for them to put in that this is Hebrew, this is Afro-Shemitic, will take the attention from the north and from the Gentiles, the Belgian Conference Gentile nations, and then point it to the south, right, to the south, the continent that's called today Africa or anciently Ethiopia, and to the linguistics of we, the people of the book, right? We, the Israelites of Ethiopia, we, the Israelites, we, the Hebrews. It will point the attention to us, right? And that right there is flipping the script. That is getting to flipping the script. Let's go on right here. It says the Latin word was used only in reference to the region around modern Tunisia. The Latin word, let's just say the Roman word, the Greco-Roman word, or we say the albino, the white Greco-Roman word, originally was used only in reference to the region around modern Tunisia, Libya. Let's bring this up here again. You see this area? You see where the arrow points right there? It says North Africa. And you see how they have that line from the Sephardic, right? You see what it says Sephardic, right? Or they say the Spanish Jews or the Hebrews. And we also have our black Jewish and black Hebrew roots in the Iberian, connected with the Iberian Peninsula, right? Remember what happened with Ferdinand and Isabella, so forth and so on, right? So you see, this shows the different regions that these people, after they left from what we call Spain, right? Some would call the Moreno Jews, so forth and so on. You see that direct line goes forward where? You see where it says Libya? The region that is in that creamish color on the map, that includes Libya, and to the left hand is the region of Tunisia. So here, looking at the etymology, which is the true roots, we see this here. Let's bring this up. So it says the Latin word originally was used only in reference to the region around modern Tunisia, right? It gradually was extended to the whole continent. Gradually, the European creeping coup against pseudo-black scholarship, right? Because none of the black scholars are really bringing this out. Very few of them. Let me say very few of them. At least none of the popular ones out there, especially in the social media, because that's where a lot of people, get their feeding from. They'll check out this, this debate or these scholars or those there, so forth and so on. And this needs to be brought to the table, right? It gradually was extended to the whole continent. It says derivation from a Phoenician cognate of Arabic afar. See, and that's another thing they try to say, that the Hebrew is Phoenician. You got to stop believing those lies. We're going to do a vlog, Jah willing, do a vlog and break that down as well. right? Because what they do is they play this. The Europeans have been masters of this. And so even when we get black scholars that go to these universities to study, say, some black, they're into black scholarship, black studies, and they talk all this black power stuff, so forth and so on, right? They can talk this talk, but their minds are not really powered truly by the divine blackness. 'Cause otherwise, they will see these errors. They will see how the European is tricking them. And instead of focusing on the tricks that we're pointing out, they would try to debunk what we're saying, but they can't debunk it. All they can do is moonwalk. All they can do is moonwalk away from it, like back up and moonwalk away from it. Here they say from an Arabic afar, dust, earth, right, is tempting. They say it's tempting. Well, let's get out of that. Let's go to the Hebrew Bible. We have afar. Afar in the Hebrew, it means dust and earth. We have afar, right, in the Ge'ez, meaning dust and earth. We have afar, and the Ge'ez is very ancient. The Ge'ez is very old. Right? Some of these pseudo scholars out there, like Garfield, they'll be talking about, the Ethiopic, this and that, that. And all they're doing is relying on some European consensus, some latter-day European consensus of latter-day scholars, not even recognizing it. They're just fooling ones. They're fooling the fools, right? Anyway, the Middle English word was Africa. So you see, we have Africa, Affrike. Let's go on. Let's go on right here. Now, let's touch on, did we touch on that one? Right? Let's touch on African. We touch on African. Let's go on African. Let's look on the African. So you see African right here, right? African. Let's scroll this up. African. Old English is Africanus. That's the plural. A native or inhabitant of Africa. Now, recall 1580s. In the 1580s, rising up around the 1580s, gradually until we get to today, was the term being referred to or used to refer to the whole continent. But it's 1580. So this terminology, right, when we say Africa, is not really Africa. Africa is not really Africa. Why do we say that Africa is not really Africa? Because it's not. 1580s is relatively a little less than 500 years ago. So a little less than 500 years ago, the European, and truly this is what really proves that the pen is mightier than the sword. The pen, to say the pen is mightier than the sword, because it's through the pen that they rewrote ancient history. Ancient history has largely been rewritten by the latter-day European Anglo-American academia. And sadly, these latter-day so-called, most of these latter-day black scholars either can't see it, or they are, either it is a willing ignorance, or it's unwilling. Maybe they know what they're doing. Maybe they're in bed with the COINTELPRO. Right? Because it causes endless controversies. They can have debates and controversies and argue back and forth, and people can be entertained, right? But there's not that real growth in our consciousness and our true understanding, understanding, overstanding. We're not getting a true standing because there's really no foundation. There's no bedrock of what they're talking about. Because they're not going to deal with the roots of these words, and what these words mean today is not necessarily what these words meant yesterday. Yet they want to go back and grab the term Kemet and say, look, Kemet is on the monuments and it says Kemet, the black land, and that's what we want to call it today. And then you want to say Kemet was in Africa. You see the cognitive dissonance? The cognitive dissonance? Can you find Africa on the wall monuments back there where you find Kemet? No, you can't. But let's go on. Old English Africanus, plural, native or inhabitant of Africa. So this idea, humanity, right? When I say humanity, let's make it a little more clear. The white people began to make themselves believe it, right? Rewrite this in their books, right? And now they have made everybody so-called believe this. But it's from the Latin Africanus. of Africa, African from Africa. Now, we already touched just now on Africa. Use of white residents of Africa from 1815. Look. Use of what? White residents. Resident evil. Resident alien. Look, use of white residents of Africa from 1815. What? So, a white man can be a African too. So this proves another faulty point about a lot of these latter-day black pseudo-scholars. Because that means when they make us believe and they try to make you believe that, well, Africa is a black land. Well, if Africa is a black land, say refer to us black people, what do we black people call it? Or what's the more original names of the continent? And once again, Ethiopia, people say come from Greek. But before the terminology was co-opted by the Greeks, Tobia was already known by the indigenous Ethiopians. I just point that. And also Tob at the root is found as well in the Hebrew Bible, as well as the land of Tob. And the word Tob means good. What do you hear most of the scholars say? Right? Pseudo or otherwise, we agree with them that the continent that's called Africa is a good land. It's a rich land in minerals and resources. And this is why we find in the Hebrew Bible and in the Hebrew language, Tob and Tobia, right? Also among the archaic, the old Ethiopians, that terminology is a terminology they use to refer to themselves. Right? They were the good people in the good land, right? So it's really the land of Tob. Tobia is the good land. That's why the original name for Ethiopia, or the pre-Africa name for Ethiopia, was Tobia, right? Or Ethiopia, right? That later on was co-opted by the Greeks and given this rhetorical, definition of burnt faces, so forth and so on. And give thanks to the Ethiopian scholars, to some Ethiopian scholars that have picked up on what your brethren, Rasiadonis Tafari, had brought forward nearly 20 years ago, right, on these social media streets and these platforms, with the meaning of Ethiopia originally being from the Afro-Semitic, right, Tob, right, Tob for good, right, like they say in modern Hebrew, they say Tov, but that's the European pronunciation. The word actually properly is pronounced as Tob or Tawab. Tawabia. But here, an African can be a white man. A white man can be an African, because use of white residents of Africa from 1815. From 1815, that's what, about 200, a little over 200, almost 300 years ago. Use of black residents from the U.S. from the 18th century. That means the 1700s. When it especially meant, quote, one brought from Africa. Sometimes was contrasted to native-born Negro. You want to go there? You want to go there? Native-born. What are they saying here? They're saying that this term African was used of black residents of the U.S. from the 18th century, 18C, 18th century, that means the 1700s. When it especially meant, in that time, right, 1700, when it especially meant, quote, one brought from Africa, end quote. And, conjunction, and sometimes was contrasted to native-born Negro. Wait. But I thought the blacks, they call them Negro. So they're trying to say that, is this another terminology? As an adjective by 1560s. I remember before we showed you in the earlier part, 1580s. That's what we say, that's the time period that they began to rewrite the ancient historical narrative and start to call the whole continent, right, of Tobia, the good land, they started to call it Africa. Because once you can do that, like if I can just rename you, I can name you whatever I want to name you, right? That means I could wipe out all your prehistory. I could wipe out your prehistory, right? And when you start to look at your prehistory, you're looking at it through the spectacles that I have given you to look through. So I could tint the spectacles. I could make them dark spectacles. I could make them infrared spectacles. I could do whatever I want to do with the spectacles because you're going to use it. Unconscious, you're not going to even say, hold on for a moment. Let me take off these spectacles. That's what we're trying to say to a lot of these other so-called scholars, black scholars out there. Take off the spectacles for a moment. We cannot talk about, or we should not talk about prior to the continent, like 1500s. We should not refer to the continent by what the colonizer has made us to believe, by his COINTELPRO. Because once we do that, it becomes faulty history. Things can creep in because you've accepted, you've accepted the biggest lie, the lie that they want to call the whole continent this. So it's not a very pro-black, right? If black is a consciousness, a higher consciousness, it's not a very pro-black thing to do, right? Last part here says, as an adjective by 1560s, pertaining to Africa or Africans. Old English had Africanisk. From 1722 as, quote, of or pertaining to black Americans. So from 1722, they started to then want to call us Africans. They sought to call us Africans, and many of our scholars and our people sincerely believe that this was a step up for us, right? A step up for us. So to even see how the COINTELPRO or the counterintelligence was at work even right then, right? Instead of us calling ourselves black Americans, we know that white Americans in this America, white Americans refer to themselves as American, or when they need to specify or distinguish themselves from blacks, they'll say white Americans. When we were called ourselves black Americans, that put us too much on an equal footing in this America, and they had to change up the rules. So they began to introduce this African thing. Now, we're not going to go to the extremes that some of our Hebrew Israelite brothers go to, right, in their whole Africa rhetoric, but there is some truth to it. Many of them just have not properly gone into the evidence to articulate it, so we can understand that there are times that, yes, we can refer to it like that, and times that we should not refer to it like that. We should choose carefully the times that we refer to it as, for what is beneficial. In this context, we will refer to it like this. In this context, we will not refer to it like that. That is power. That is black intellectual power. Let's go here, Negro. Let's go right here and look up Negro. Negro, because you heard a lot about Negro, right? Negro, 1550s, right? From 1550. Now notice something right here. 1550s is the very same period of time that they began to rename the whole continent of Tawabia, of Tobia, of Ethiopia. They started to rename it Africa. But before that time, it was the Roman province of Tunisia, Libya. It was a province. So when you look at the map, once again, let's look at this map right here. Boom. You see where, here we go right there, Tunisia. Well, you don't see Tunisia, but Libya, and the portion of that's on the side right there is Tunisia. That whole region right there, that is under Libya, right? That's under Libya. Right. Okay, we can go through some of this right here. Just looking through some maps right here. Let's bring this. Let's share the Baruch clip right there. There. All right. Okay, here. Right, the different migrations of the Israelites. Right, where we see the migration along the east of the River Nile, and then we see crossing the River Nile into Hamitic lands. Right, and then going to North America, the Caribbean, and South America during the Transatlantic Ocean slave trade. There's no such thing as the Middle East. That was another point that some of these pseudo scholars came on talking about the Middle East. Right, Israel is northeast. Here they have Africa. or northeast Towabia, Tobia, right? The eastern connection. You see, the thing that separates us from the Israelites of Ethiopia is where our respective peoples and communities went after the fall of Jerusalem circa 70 AD, right? Black history in America started in Deuteronomy 28, Leviticus 26. It's much longer than the month of February, right? Our true story, our true history, right? Right, just to show what's what. Let's look at this. This is another map. Some other interesting maps right here. We had came up with this one. This is the other one right here. This is the other one, or this is the same one, but here we have it. Here we have it more highlighted, like a little clearer right there. But you can see where they have Abyssinia, right, which is based on the European Arabic Islamic intellectual, because that one time the Islamic civilization, we can say, was more scholarly. A lot of that did have to do with Egypt, since Egypt is a prime location that the Arabs and the Mohammedans, took over, right? Took over. Let's go through some of these maps right here. As you can see right over here, also there's on this map the Abyssinian reference right there, right? And this map is a little more true in that sense that every place is not named. The borders, right? The borders are divided based on the rivers, the mountains, and the boundaries before the times of the Gentile, before the European came in. You see where they have Tripoli? I want to show you this right here, the Tripoli. You see where Tripoli is right there at the top? That is the area that on the old Roman maps was Africa, right? So they were able to rename the whole continent. And by them renaming the whole continent, it gave them the context, right, to continue this deception. So it's like the Bible even says forever learning, right? Black people, even the black scholars, become like those who are forever learning, but never able to come to the acknowledgement of the truth, right? Because they didn't weed out. What we're seeking to do is weed out this African thing, right, and put it into its more proper context. And we're not saying that in modern times it does not have a point of reference in modern times, but we have to know, well, why does it have a point of reference in modern time and what really happened? So here from the 1550s, Negro meant a member of a black-skinned race of Africa. Notice how they write this definition here. A member of A means like one, black-skinned race of Africa. Now, from the Israelite connection, right, the Israelite teaching, this would relate to the Israelites. The Israelites were a black-skinned race, or the Hebrews, Afro-Shemitic people were a black-skinned, like a melanated, black and brown, but black-skinned race, right, of what's called, quote, Africa. From Spanish or Portuguese, negro, black. From Latin, nigrum, the nominative is niger. You see what it says niger? You see what it says Latin, right? Latin, right? Nigrum. Let's just highlight this right here. We're looking at this part right here. Notice that the nominative, the name, right, used as a name, is niger or nigger, right? So we have nigger right here. Let's go over here. Let's go right here. Let's see if we can go. We have nigger. Right, let's go over here. Let's see if we can bring this up right here. Let's go right here. Let's bring this up. Do we have nigger in the Bible? The same, we're going to go to the same spelling, right? The same spelling, boom, one verse, right? Acts of the Apostles 13:1. Now, there were in the church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon. Right, you see what it says, Simeon? That was called Niger. Now, why was he called this? Remember that Acts of the Apostles is during the time of the Roman Empire. Right? The Roman Empire is already on the rise and is still rising at this particular time. Simeon, that was called Niger. Right? And then let's go to the G3526. Niger. You see how it has Niger, the phonetics? Niger, right? Niger, black. It was a surname of the prophet Shimon. Shimon Niger. Shimon Niger. Shimon Niger. Right? That was his surname. Right? Of Latin origin, you see? Of Latin origin, black. Nigger. Nigger. A Christian or a Nazarene. Meshahawian, a Nazarene more correctly. Later on they were called Christian, but Niger, nigger, right? Just to connect the dots, right? To show how when we study the Bible correctly, we can put the academic information into context and really see it in its HD, higher definition. Black, dark, sable, dusky. Applied to the night sky, a storm, and the complexion. So this terminology, it applied to the night sky, right, which could be nigger, right, nigrum. A storm could be nigger, right, or the complexion, nigger, niger, Niger, Nigeria. Figuratively, in a figurative sense. All right, so there's different senses of words. It could be gloomy, unlucky, bad, wicked. So we can see that so-called white supremacy chose to use this word in a figurative sense instead of just applying its basic sense. Right? According to Devon, a word of unknown etymology. Isn't that something? According to one particular scholar out there. According to Watkins, perhaps from niquit, night. The Latin word also was applied to the black peoples of Africa. Interesting. Like they applied it to Shimon, to Simon in Acts of the Apostles, right? The black peoples, right? But the usual terms were, look at that. You see right there? The usual terms were what? The usual terms were Ethiops, Ethiopia, Ethiops, and Afar. Remember that Adam was formed, right, according to Genesis chapter 2, from the Afar, right? Let's just bring this up as well since we're here, just to be thorough right here, right? Let's bring this up right here. Adam, right, man, right, from the dust, right here. And it says, Yahuwah Elohim formed man of the dust of the ground, right? Let's pause right there at the comma. Let's bring up the dust. Afar, you see right there? Afar is the H6083 word. Afar. You see, afar. So now, look at this right here. This is some of the, go down here. Okay, boom, Strong's definition. Afar. Let's go to the root afar, right? Dust, powder. Some say gray, pulverized. Let's go down here. The gray, right? Dust, so forth and so on. But the dust of the context here is the dust of the ground. The ground right here, what's the word for ground in the Hebrew? The ground is the Adamah. And the Adamah is that reddish brown, almost like that kemet type of ground, that reddish brown ground. So we have Adamah for the reddish brown ground, and we have Adam, reddish brown, that reddish brown Kemetic. Remember they say Kemet is the black land, but if you really look at it, the Kemet is so dark, it's reddish brown, but the reddish brown is so rich in that nutrient-rich soil because it's from the inundation of the floods that come when the dogs start rise, right, on the man-child's earth day, the man-child's birthday, the head of creation day, right, which is September 23rd, right, and the headwaters come down the Nile, right, into what we have as the Nile Valley, and that forms the Kemet. But the ground is not literally black, but it's so richly reddish brown. It's so deeply reddish brown. You know, like black people's complexion, right? The different shades of black people's complexion does have a red tone to it. So here's a link with Adam and the blackness, as we would call it, and the Bible right here. So here, let's see, a little bit more right here. Now it goes into some other things right here. the N word, so forth and so on. You can get into some of it. Booker T. Washington, whether Negroes ought to be called Negroes or members of the colored race. That was that debate from, back at that time, so forth and so on. Now, from that, we're going from the root to the fruit. Then we get more. More is a later term. This terminology of more comes into the equation later. Right? A good reference book is J.A. Rogers' Nature Knows No Color Line, where he gives a lot of the points of reference of when terminology was used. And we can tell when terminology was used because there are manuscripts and books and writings and even archaeology that have certain words there. So we can tell, okay, this term was used way back then, and this term was used after then. Right? Meaning African American vernacular, the English language as spoken by U.S. blacks, right? So we have the French negre. Negre is 16th century, borrowing from Spanish negro. So the French terminology for negre, right, it was borrowed from Spanish. So this is how among the European, the Gentile languages, they will go off of their fellow Europeans' research scholarship usage because they're all in this conspiracy together, right? Older English words, right, were more and blackamoor. A Middle English word for Ethiopian, perhaps also a Negro generally, was blue man. Blue man. Don't they have some blue man where some white people paint their skin blue or something like that? Blue man, right? Blue man. Now remember, this is well after the time of, remember what the Greeks called Ethiops. What did the Romans call Negro, nigger, Niger, right? Niger. The question is Nigeria. Where did they get that name from? All right. So here they're showing this right here, Negrum, right? The Portuguese, right? Then 1550s, right? Then we come down to this term today. So here, let's sum up on this right here, brothers and sisters. There's another exhibit we'd like to show you right here. Let's just go through some of these exhibits right here, right, of Africa. So the continent, right, the continent, part of the hijacking of the continent was giving it that name because that name was a control factor. Like, you see this map right here, where you see Tobia, Ethiopia, and what they call Arabia. You notice that it's pointing out kingdoms, significant ancient kingdoms, known kingdoms, right? Known kingdoms. But you notice that nothing else is really named because all you had was tribes and peoples and rivers and mountains, right? This points to a time prior to the Belgium conference and the Gentiles, the nation states dividing and conquering, where they put in all these artificial borders, right? So here, these are some maps for some related, right? Now this is going way back a period of time earlier, the kingdom of Sheba, like the Queen of Sheba, right? Sheba, yeah. The Queen of Sheba was on both sides of what's known as the Red Sea, the Etra Bahir, right? Or the Yam Suf, right? From the Hebrew, right? These are also related maps right here. You see where it has the Israelite homeland is the same area as Sheba. You see Sheba right there. Sheba, human origins, right? Human origins, though we have some old bones found in Ethiopia, the real origins was further south, right? And you can see these migrations to West Africa, like the one from like where they call 70 AD, right? Also ones were exported from places like Syria, the Mediterranean. And you see what it has Berber, because that was after ones was pushed out of Spain during the time of Ferdinand and Isabella, right? And they had a lot of so-called ethnic right? Ethnic cleansing, right? Ethnic cleansing, right? The continent right here, here. What's the continent name, right? What's the continent name? The name of the continent right here, here. Let's shifting places, names in Africa, right? Very good, Imhotep. I think Imhotep did something right there. Right there, just take a screenshot of that. Might use that for the still. And we've been crossing over, right? We've been crossing over ever since. And this is the real key right here. The truth about black biblical Hebrew Israelites, the Jews, right? The world's best kept secret. Right there. Right? All right, we'll get into some of that at another time, brothers and sisters. So here, a little appendix right here, like a kind of little additional right here. Found some of our other exhibits, some more invoices right here. So here we have Oceanus, right? When you talk about the transatlantic slave trade during the period of time that it actually occurred, what is called the transatlantic enslavement. All right, that's a key thing. I see some others, I hear many other ones picking up on that instead of us just regurgitating, these things that we hear. We have to listen to our fellow, scholarship and update and upgrade. So they call it the transatlantic. They're speaking about the southern Atlantic Ocean. But at that time, what was it known as? It's very interesting, although some speculate about time travel and, whether we can time travel. People say, well, what would it be like if we could go back in the past? In a sense, we can. And in the true scholarship sense, we must, in order to get a true context, so that when we then return to today, we can see how we really got here with a true story and not the COINTELPRO psychobabble and pseudo scholarship out there, especially that is prevailing in the so-called the online, a lot of places in the social media, online black so-called consciousness community. Here, Oceanus Aethiopicus. So it's actually called the Ethiopian Ocean, right? The Ethiopian Ocean. So the transatlantic, it was the Oceanus Aethiopicus enslavement trade. So what's very interesting right here is the name change, right? And who changed the name? The scriptures, the Holy Bible speaks about, and they speaking about the anti-black Messiah, right? The anti-black messiahs, like the antichrist and antichrist, anti-black Christ, anti-black messiahs, those who are against I and I, those who are against us, we peoples, once lost, now found, black and brown people of the Beit Yisrael, right? What is very, very interesting, right? When we come to look at this right here, it was known as the Oceanus Aethiopicus, right? Even though this particular map here is referred to, you can see up here at the top, they say Africa. Right now, this you can tell, or if you can't tell, we'll tell you that this is in like a Latin. This map right here is in Latin, and the naming, nomenclature, description is mainly in Latin. Right? And what's interesting about this particular map, this is like I think from the 1700s, right? 1700s. Here we're just looking through some of our pictures and visual exhibits right here, right? Because a picture, 1,000 words right here. So now here, as we look through the map, it's pointing out the different sort of peoples, the different sort of regions, right? Different sort of regions. Here we can see this particular region here is called Abyssinia. Now here they call this Africa Nova. That's the S there, right? Let's see, yeah, it looked like an F. Disaripto. I think that is, how does that go again? that letter that looks like a F is actually, I think, a S. If we're correct, but like a new description. They're calling this a new description. So this map is like a new description map, right? Now up here, right, this says Mare Atlan, right? But the region that they said that we came from, they call it the Gold Coast, right? Or our ancestors rather, like Benin and these places, and like, you know, Guinea, Ghana, Ghana. It's interesting, Ghana, get this right here, Ghana, in the Hebrew, when we say Gan means garden. Gan means garden. Check. All right, going to build on that. Remember who shared this knowledge with you first, right? Gan, as in Ghana, means garden. Right? Just take a check on that. Right? So here, from this particular region, the ocean that is right next to it is Oceanus Aethiopicus. But now they call it today, they call this the Atlantic Ocean, and more specifically the Southern Atlantic Ocean. Now, if we look through these particular regions, like Congo, you can see Congo in there. Now, notice the particular region that they call Abyssinia. I don't know if you can make it out clear. We're zooming in on this section. Let's zoom out so you can see it in perspective, right? In perspective. Let's zoom in on this section in West Africa. Now, notice what they call this, the Libyan Interior. The Libyan Interior, right? You ever heard there's a military cadence that talk about the shores of Tripoli? The shores of Tripoli. Forget how the cadence go right now, but there's a military cadence that talk about the shores of Tripoli, right? And it's interesting because America, though America was still in that isolationist phase, they had gone all the way over to Africa to help and support their fellow Gentile brothers, right? The Belgium, the Belgium Conference, those Gentile nations, those European nations, the nation that divided up Africa. So the first thing they had to do was do intel. And the first part of the intel is logistics. So as we study the different maps and look at the maps in the chronological sense of the maps, the earliest maps prove what they came in to find was the fact. And as we get to the later maps, today's maps is how they reworked it. But the reworking of the map also shows the subjugation, the dividing, the conquering, right, of, we could say, black peoples and peoples on the continent, right, and our homelands, right, our ancestors' ancestral lands. So the Barbaria, that's right over there in that part, right, that we showed already improved. North Africa, that was actually Africa, right, what they call Africa. So we just want to show this as an exhibit, right? There's a lot of little micro detail, right, micro detail down here, right, trying to make out the names right here. Manotopa, Manomotopa. Yeah, I think like the name like for like Zaire, places that are called today Zaire, right? And hail up to Sister Denise. Yes, I and I sister, so some great scholarship right there. Now, the older maps show that there was a different position. We got to follow up on this of what and where was Ethiopia. Where's Ethiopia at? Like we have where Brooklyn at, where was Ethiopia at? What and where, right? Like Africa, this one's going to be called more Africa, right, is not really Africa, right? Africa is not really Africa. It's like a wake-up call. Africa is not really Africa. Now, let's zoom out from that right there, right? Zoom out from that right there. And then they've called this on different maps. I'm going to study more some of the maps, but what was interesting about this particular map here is this portion right here, the Oceanus Aethiopicus, the Ethiopian Ocean. So during the time of the enslavement trade from West Africa, the ocean was called the Ethiopian Ocean. Now imagine if we called it today what it should be called more correctly, the Trans-Ethiopian Ocean enslavement trade, or even if they want to say slave trade, by putting Ethiopia there, that would be a wake-up call to folks. People were like, hold up. And this is what it was to many of our ancestors over 100 years ago, right? 100, 150, almost 200 years ago, our black ancestors who were the real scholars, right, going into this information, who were able to read and write. This is one of the reasons why they didn't want the enslaved to be able to read or write. And many of our people who were able to read or write those older books, right? This is why we've gone into publishing those older books of our black ancestors. You know, black men as well as black women and some youths too wrote and studied and researched books. And this is what brought us to the point of identifying ourselves as Ethiopian Hebrews and as Israelites. The real roots of the Israelite movement, of the black Israelite movement, the real roots. That has to be another lecture, discussion, and some books to the real roots, the other half of the story that many of the alphabet boy Israelite camps don't go into. They only go to like 70 AD, 1970 AD, so we refer to them as the 1970 AD Israelites. But let's go over here, right? Now this one right here, this is also a part of it, the southern portion of Africa. You see where it says right here, monomotapa. Now on today, they call this area like the Zaire area, right? And then you see down there where it has Kafiris, the Kafir. Now in Hebrew, Kofir, like we say Kippur, the Kippur has to do with atonement. But it also has to do with black, like in black pitch tar, black pitch, right? This is what was used like with Noah's Ark, right? That black pitch tar that was able to keep it watertight for the salvation of earlier humanity. Also with Moses, right? Moses, when his mother put him in like that wicker type basket, she also put the kafar. But then they flip it on us and they say like the kafir boy, right? And then they go to the Arabic, because in the Arabic sense, it can mean like infidel, right? So the linguistics is very, very important to say, okay, this word might mean this in this language, but then the sound means something different over here. And so we have to define it according to our own roots. This is why we have to know ourselves. So this also is a very interesting map as well, pointing to like the southern portion of Africa, right? And some structures. There were structures that were built. And this surprised the European when he went into some parts of Africa, because in many parts of Africa it was just the land, the rivers, the mountains, the trees, the animals, and people lived in little villages or so forth and so on. But as they got more and more towards the south, they found these structures, right? These structures. So there's this whole structure, as you see right here, a kind of an aerial view of this structure. And there's the Israelite connection, right? The Israelite connection, the Afro-Shemitic connection of our people as well. Now, this is the map that we sought to show right here. This is a real early map, I think going back maybe to the 1500s, right? 15th century, or perhaps the 1500s, right time. Now, as you can see, as we zoom in, this was based on their understanding, their exploration, right? Notice up here, it seems like a rope. You see at the top, probably a mountain range, right? They're trying to point out some mountain range. But you see right there in the center, you see what it says Aethio. Then you see the P-I and then the A below, Ethiopia. Then it says regnum, like ruling, like king. You see where it has like a king's crown, right? That's the link with the Prester John. Prester John refers to one king, but in truth it refers to a series of those Solomonic Davidic king. This is why the king's list is true in spite of what these pseudo scholars like, Garfield and these others, these clowns out there are trying to say. But then again, they can't go very deeply because they're trapped in a linguistic matrix in English. right? And their English is not even that strong. Their real knowledgeability about the English words. But notice at the top right there, the continent in this old map here is being referred to as Ethiopia, right? And then you see what it has regnum, like kingdom, kingdom. These are different kingdoms that they had encountered in the exploration of the Gentiles, the Europeans of that time, right? And then you see right in the center, you see Ethiopia. Ethiopia right in the center. This further proves that the continent was called Ethiopia from the European perspective. Tawabia, Tawab, or Tob in the Hebrew means good, right? The good land, Tawabia, Tobia. But you see at the top, right there, you see where it says Africa? Right there in the center at the top, that is Libya. That's what we call Libya today, right? And then they call, like they said that below that, you know, like where they referred to in West Africa, they said that was Libya, right? So Libya today was called Africa then, and the continent today that they referred to as Africa was called Tobia or Tawabia. That was referred to as Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the Greekization, the way we have it today, is from the Greek, right? But now when we say about Tob, Tawab, we're going to our own roots. You get into our roots. So we're going pre 1500s, right? Pre 1500s, pre 1,000 years, 2,000, and even we can link it with the Bible, the land of Tob, right? The land of Tob. They try to say they don't know where the land of Tob is or misidentify it, right? Because once again, you know, that would be too telling. They would be destroying their whole matrix. Now, this was another kind of book cover. Now, here's what the Gentiles have done today, right? They have been successful in dividing and conquering and setting up artificial nation states, right? You know, and their matrix. That's why in the beginning was the word. In the beginning was the name. Name is very, very important, right? Then over here, this is also different areas, right? Sectioning it into different areas, different regions, right? And now this is from the European perspective because this was essential and is essential to his divide and conquer into the times of the Gentiles, the times of the nation states. Now we livicate this to, you know, I and I ancestors, you know, I and I ancestors, yes. You know, the Hebrews, the Israelites in captivity do our best, right, to free ourselves from mental slavery. So my brothers and sisters are going to seal up right here. What and where was Africa, really? And Africa, as we refer to today, was not Africa. It was the good land, Tobia.